Hello friends, welcome back. Let's continue our discussion on UV visible spectrometry. You know by now that in UV visible spectrometry, what do we do is we take radiation in the UV visible range, make it interact with suitable absorbing species, and that interaction leads to electronic transitions in the absorbing species, and that manifests itself in terms of a spectrum, and that spectrum we take and make use of in terms of quantitative and qualitative determination of the analyte. Now, the question comes up is that how do we make such an interaction happen, and how do we get the spectrum out of that interaction? For that, we need to use an instrument there, and that exactly is the kind of area which we are going to take up in today's session there. In today's session, essentially we are going to talk about the instrumentation required for UV visible spectrometry. The session is planned as follows, that is, to begin with, we will briefly review what we did in the previous session. Thereafter, we will try to list what are essential components of a UV visible spectrometer and what is their layout in the spectrometer there. Having done that, then we will take up three components today, which we will be discussing in detail, and they happen to be the radiation sources, wavelength selectors and sample handling devices. We will talk in terms of what is the purpose of these components, then how do they work, and what kind of components are used in given kind of a spectrometer there. And towards the end, we will try to sum up what we do in today's session. Okay. Let us recall what we did in the previous session. In the previous session, basically we started by recalling Beer-Lambert law, and then thereafter we talked about different types of deviations which are possible from Beer-Lambert law, and we classified these deviations in terms of three broad groups. They happen to be the real deviation, or so called the limitations of the law, and then we came down to chemical deviations. Then towards the end we talked about the instrumental deviations. So, all that basically forms the part of the basic aspects of our UV visible spectrometry. Now, we move further and talk about what is the kind of instrumentation used here, and to understand that we make a beginning by listing what are different essential components of a UV visible spectrometer, and they happen to be the radiation sources. That means we have to have a source of radiation, then there are wavelength selectors there, then we have got sample handling devices, then detectors, and towards the end we have to have a component like signal processing and output devices. Essentially, there are 5 components which are a must to be there to constitute a UV visible spectrometer, and these components are arranged in the following way. That is, let us understand what exactly you are doing here. You have a radiation source. Imagine a bulb. Okay, when you light a bulb, it gives you radiation of a wide range of wavelengths there. Now, out of that radiation source, the radiation which is coming out, we do not need to interact all the radiation in one go. So, we need to have a single wavelength or maybe a little more than that. So, we need some kind of a device which is called as a wavelength selector. That means, out of the whole range which is coming from the radiation source, this kind of chops off or takes out a small portion of that, and that radiation is made to fall on a sample cell. That means, a cuvette or a container which contains the sample, and this radiation interacts with this, and what comes out of it, that is taken up by the detector there. And once the signal is picked up a detector, that is sent to a device which basically processes this data and gives output in terms of a spectrum there. So, that is the broad layout of a UV visible spectrometer. Now, let us continue and talk about these different components one by one. Let us begin with the radiation sources there. So, what is the purpose of a radiation source? As I just mentioned, the purpose is to provide a stable high energy output over a broad range of wavelengths. What does it mean? If I have a source, I need that source is going to provide me radiation over a range of wavelengths, and what we need to have is this must give me a stable high energy output. There are two qualifiers for that. Stable means I do not want that any fluctuation should be there, because I am going to use this machine or this instrument for quantitative determination. If there is a kind of a fluctuation there, that will hamper my results from there. So, it has to have a stable state, and also it has to have high energy output. That means, the intensity of radiation which is coming out from the source should be of high intensity, so that I get a good spectrum from there. And for UV visible spectrometry, there are three kinds of sources we use. For UV range, we use hydrogen or deuterium lamp there. For visible range, we use tungsten filament lamp, and for UV visible range, we try to use xenon lamps there. So, there are three kind of sources depending on what region. Suppose I want to make a measurement in the UV visible range or UV range only, probably I will use only a hydrogen lamp or a deuterium lamp. For visible measurements, I go for tungsten filament lamp, or if I want to measure the entire range, maybe I can go for the xenon lamp. So, different instruments use different kind of lamps depending on what is their applicability over there. Okay. Let us see what is this hydrogen lamp there. Basically, the radiation source for the UV range happens to be hydrogen or deuterium lamp. They are identical to each other. The only thing is the different only in terms of what is the gas used in that. Essentially, a hydrogen or a deuterium lamp consists of a cylindrical tube containing hydrogen or deuterium at low pressures, and there is a quartz window for the radiation to exit there. Basically, you have a tube here, and then we have got hydrogen or deuterium gas in that, and there is a quartz window somewhere here from which the radiation comes out over there. So, the basic principle of this kind of a radiation source happens to be that essentially there are hydrogen molecules or deuterium molecules in the lamp over there. So, when I give energy, so these hydrogen molecules get excited there. So, this star represents a excited species over there, and the bracket, it could be hydrogen or deuterium, both of them are not there. Okay. So, essentially the first step is that these gas molecules, hydrogen or deuterium, they get excited there. Once they are excited, then what happens is these molecules are unstable. So, when they are unstable, they break down. They break down, say a hydrogen molecule which is in excited state, that will break down to give me two hydrogen atoms which are shown here as H prime and H double prime, and also give us radiation in the UV range. So, this H nu is the photon which is coming out over there, and what I get is I get a wide range of photons over there, that is from 160 to about 375 nanometers. And what you find is between the two, say hydrogen or deuterium, deuterium is a better lamp because this gives radiation which are more intense there. So, deuterium lamps are used more often than hydrogen lamps over there. Okay. That is as regards our radiation source for the UV range. When we come down to the visible range, what do we do is we use what is called as a tungsten filament lamp. This is a very common lamp there. Essentially, this consists of a thin coiled tungsten wire that is sealed in a evacuated glass tube. That means, you have a glass tube which is evacuated, then we got a coiled tungsten wire over there, and then there are electrical input over there. So, when we give energy to that, that means, when you give electrical energy to that, so this filament gets heated up there. We know that it is typical like your the bulbs we use at homes. So, when the current passes through that, this tungsten filament gets heated up and starts glowing. When they glow, they give out radiation, and the radiation comes out in a wide range from about 320 nanometers to about 2500 nanometers. It is a very, very broad range it gives us there. However, nowadays we are not using tungsten lamps per se, though they are relatively cheaper there, but we are now using what is called as a tungsten halogen lamp there. This is a improvised version or a kind of a modified version of tungsten lamp there. The structure is similar one, but basically what we have is the tubing which was made up of glass in case of tungsten lamp, it happens to be made up of quartz, number one. Number two, that is also contains certain amount of iodine vapors in that. So, this tungsten halogen lamp is more efficient one there for the following reasons, that firstly, we can operate it at higher temperatures there, because if you are using glass, we cannot heat beyond a point there. So, accordingly, since in case of tungsten halogen lamp, I can go to higher temperatures, then what happens is that output which comes out is of higher intensity, number one. Number two, this gives me a still broader range of the wavelengths which are coming out from there. Even part of the UV range can be covered by this. And another aspect of it is that this tungsten halogen lamp has a higher life. That means, it is almost double that of the ordinary tungsten lamp over there. So, nowadays the instruments employ tungsten halogen lamps in place of tungsten lamps there as a radiation source for the visible range. Okay. As I mentioned earlier too, that nowadays we are using even xenon lamps in the instruments for UV visible spectrometry or UV visible spectrometers or spectrophotometers. So, in this case the advantage of xenon lamp is that it covers the entire UV and visible range there. You can see that the output here, it starts from about 200 nanometers and goes beyond 1000 nanometers there. So, this gives me in one lamp itself I have the whole range there. However, the problems with this lamp is that there is a lot of stray light coming in this case. So, that actually hampers the outcome of the measurement there. And another aspect of it is that though it gives me instrumental kind of a stray light over there, but it can be used because it has a very long lifetime over there. So, we essentially have to balance between what is the quality of spectrum I get and the life of the lamp over there. So, people depending on the requirements, they will either go for a xenon lamp, so that it covers the entire range, or they use two different lamps there, that is a deuterium lamp for the UV range and the tungsten halogen lamp for the visible range, or we go for xenon lamp. So, essentially we have to make a balance between the two. Okay. So, that is as regards the radiation sources there. Now, let us move further and talk about the second part of essential components of a spectrometer, that happens to be wavelength selector. So, what we are seeing, we have a source that is giving us radiation, and that radiation is coming along a very broad range. So, I need a device which can kind of select part of this range there. That means, you have a device which can select the desired wavelengths from a radiation source. Okay. Now, there are different types of wavelength selectors we use here, and the choice will depend on what region of spectrum I am talking about. Say for UV visible spectrometry, because why did I mention this is because wavelength selectors are used for all kind of instrumentation. Right now we are focusing attention only onto UV visible spectrometry, but for other kind of spectroscopy is there, say IR spectroscopy or other things there again we will be using wavelength selectors, but they will be of a different type there. Now, coming back to our UV visible spectrometry, essentially there are three kinds of selectors we use there. One, the most common one or the simplest one are absorption filters, then there are interference filters, and then we got monochromators there. Let us learn about each one of them. Okay. Absorption filters are very simple thing. They basically there is a small piece of glass here which contains inorganic or organic materials there. And how does it work is basically what happens that if I have, this is a schematic representation of a absorption filter there. So, you have an absorption filter there, radiation is passing through that, say I am just showing here the orange and blue color radiation is getting through that. So, blue is absorbed there and orange comes out of it there. Essentially it absorbs light of certain wavelengths and allows that of the others to pass through there. So, essentially you have a broad range of wavelengths coming there from the radiation source there. I put a filter there, the filter absorbs part of it and allows rest of it to pass through. So, it is typical filtration kind of a working happening over here. Now, the question is how do I decide which filter to use for a given kind of measurement there, and that is ascertained in terms of what is called as a color wheel. I am sure that you have heard about or know about what is called as a color wheel there. Essentially this represents different colors in terms of their complementarity there. So, the opposite colors are complementary to each other. Now, from this color wheel what we see is that suppose I want to make measurement of a solution which is red colored there. So, to make a measurement of red color solution I will be using a filter which is of green coloration there. For say for this coloration I used this filter there, for this is the one. That means essentially I use this color wheel to decide which filter to use for a given measurement there. If I look at absorption filters, the only drawback with them is that they do not provide monochromatic light. So, what do? There is a way out to that. What we can do is you can take different combination there and try to make the output from that filter to be as narrow as possible there. That is a possibility there. However, because these are little crude piece of apparatus there, they are typically used in low cost instruments there. They can be used only for the visible range, because we do not have filters for the UV range over there. We are working on this particular mechanism there. Now, as I just said that we can use combination of filters to get narrow range of wavelengths. So, on the basis of this we find that there are three types of absorption filters possible there. One is called as long pass absorption filters. So, what as the name suggests, so it allows the radiation of long wavelength to pass through. That means, suppose this is my filter over here, I am passing all this radiation from lower wavelength like this to this one. When this radiation is passing through that, so it cuts off wavelength of certain wavelength and below that, and allows a wavelength and above this to pass through there. So, that is long pass. That means, it allows wavelengths higher than a cutoff point to pass through. Another version can be short pass. It is just the opposite of this one there, wherein it only allows wavelengths lower than a cutoff point to pass through. That means, any radiation above this will not be allowed to go through, only this set of wavelengths can be made to pass through there. And the third variety could be, that is what is called as a band pass, which allows only wavelengths over a specific bandwidth. That means, of the whole range, only this small bandwidth is allowed to pass through. Radiation above this are not allowed, below this are also not allowed there. So, there are three types of absorption filters commercially available there, which can be used in the instruments over there. Okay. Let us move further. Let us move further and talk about another kind of device, which is called as a interference filter. So, these are highly accurate filters which are used to selectively pass light of a small range of wavelengths while reflecting the others one. Now, essentially this again is made up of glass. This glass has optical coatings. That means, if I have a glass piece, this thing, I make a number of coatings on that, and when the radiation passes through that, the outcome from this happens to be a very narrow range of wavelengths there. So, there are more advanced version of the ordinary filters over there. And the advantage of these interference filters is that there are filters available which can be used for variety of ranges there. We have filters for UV range, for visible range, or even near IR range also, they are available commercially there. So, they are better than our ordinary filters there, or the glass filters there. Now, after these filters, let us talk about yet another class of wavelength selector. They are called as monochromators. This is the one which is used most often, because most of the modern instruments will employ a monochromator as against the filters there, because filters are used for low cost instruments there, where we need to work out only a small range of wavelengths there, or maybe few wavelengths there. But if I want to run the whole spectrum, I want to study the behavior of the analyte over a whole range, then I need to use what is called as a monochromator. A monochromator basically is a device that provides radiation of a desired wavelength, a particular wavelength. Monochromator means single wavelength out of a range of wavelengths which is emitted by the source. There are two types available there. One is called as a prism monochromator, and second happens to be grating monochromators there. And as the name suggests, so first type uses a prism, in second case we use a grating. Let us learn about this. We know that a prism reflects radiation of different wavelengths to different extents due to the difference in their refractive index. That is, when I pass a white light through a prism, we find that we get a whole spectrum out of it. This is because that different radiations which are constituting this white light, they are reflected differentially by the prism. As a consequence, we get whole range of spectrum coming over there. And what you find is that the shorter wavelengths are reflected more than the longer wavelengths there. That means, this is a shorter wavelength, so there is a more refraction there, and this is a longer wavelength, this is reflected to a lesser extent there. And this very property of a prism is made use of in case of a prism monochromator. Okay. Now, let us look at how does a prism monochromator work. As I just mentioned, a prism monochromator is based on the differential refraction of light by the prism, and essentially what we have is a prism monochromator consists of two slits there. One is an entrance slit, one is an exit slit there, and there are two lenses there. One is called as a collimating lens, one is a focusing lens, then of course we got a prism somewhere here. So, what basically happens is we have a radiation source somewhere here. The radiation is coming, we make it pass through entrance slit, and then this radiation which comes is made to fall on a collimating lens. So, that lens makes this radiation go through the prism there. It collimates and makes it fall onto the prism, and from the prism, after refraction, the radiations are coming down over there, which are focused by another lens over there, and then these radiations are made to pass through a exit slit over there. So, the whole process is as such, that is, we rotate this prism in a predetermined way. When you rotate the prism, so different radiations, that means the radiation of different wavelengths are made to kind of fall on the exit slit, and so what comes out from here is of a given wavelength only. So, that is a monochromatic radiation which comes out from the exit slit. So, suppose I want to get wavelength lambda 1 for a given wavelength. So, what do I do is I make the prism rotate in such a fashion that only that particular wavelength is allowed to pass through from there. I rotate it further, another wavelength comes there, and so on and so forth. So, I play around, because this is all done by computer control. That means, we rotate this prism in such a fashion that we get our the desired wavelength as a from the exit slit over there. Okay. Now, let us go further and talk about the second kind of monochromators, that is called as a grating monochromator. So, to that to be understood, let us understand first what is a grating. Grating basically is a series of closely spaced parallel grooves which are etched down the smooth reflective surface of a solid material. Essentially, what we have is, we got a material there. On the material, there are very fine grooves are cut on that. Typically, you must have seen a compact disc there. On that, you see that there are very fine grooves are there. So, similar to that, what we have is on the grating here. The purpose of this grating is that when the radiation fall on that gets reflected, and this, the intensity of radiation which is reflected from this, that will depend on the wavelength there, and this is what is used in the grating monochromator. Here again, what we find that the grating monochromator, as in case of prism monochromator, so there are two slits over there, one is an entrance slit, one is an exit slit. Then of course, as against lenses over there, we got concave mirrors in this case, and then of course, we had to have a grating over there. So, the mechanism is the same again. Radiation from a source here is made to pass through entrance slit, and then this concave mirror makes it fall onto the grating there, and after reflection it goes over here. You take another set of another concave mirror, and that puts it together onto the exit slit there. So, here again we play around with the grating there, we rotate in a predetermined way, and as a consequence we get a desired wavelength coming out from the exit slit over there. So, that is how a grating monochromator works there. So, a wavelength selector essentially could be a filter, an interference filter, or a monochromator, and within monochromator we could be using a prism monochromator or a grating monochromator. Let us continue and come down to yet another essential component of a spectrophotometer, that happens to be sample handling. This is a very crucial thing, because essentially when I am going to make a measurement, as I said earlier, we have a radiation, the radiation after suitable kind of selection there has to fall onto the sample there. So, we need to have some device to hold the sample there, and typically for UV visible spectrometry, the sample is usually measured in vapor phase or in solution, very often in solution, but sometimes we even use vapor phase over there. So, for that to be done, what basically is done is, this sample, whether a solution or a neat liquid or vapors, they are taken into some kind of a container. That container is called a cuvette, and that is typically made up of quartz or glass. These cuvettes come in variety of shapes over there. Depending on the kind of requirement, we can use the cuvette of a suitable type there. But what is important to note here is that though these cuvettes come in quartz or glass, but if I have to use in the UV range, I cannot use glass there, because glass itself absorbs UV radiation there. So, I cannot use a glass cuvette for making UV measurement. However, for visible range measurement, I can comfortably use a glass cuvette there, because glass cuvettes are much cheaper, whereas the quartz are terribly expensive there. So, one has to make a choice over there. For routine measurements in the visible range, we can comfortably use glass cuvettes. Yet another thing we need to know here is that what kind of a solvent we can use, because that is one bit, because we are using a cuvette could be glass or quartz. We know that glass cannot be used in the UV range, but what kind of a solvent we use if I am trying to make a measurement there, there again there are certain restrictions there. The restriction happens to be for visible range, things are not that difficult there, because visible range is comfortable, but when we are going to make measurements in the UV range, then the choice of solvent becomes very important there, because the solvent must be transparent within the range which is being measured over there. And what you find is, typically for UV measurement, we use solvents which are UV grade or also called as spectroscopic grade solvents there. So, these are solvents which are extensively purified, so that they do not absorb this radiation there, because typically if you take a solvent there and if you pass radiation through that, even solvent itself will absorb. If it absorbs, then it will interfere with my determination of the analyte there. So, I must ensure that the solvent I am using does not absorb the range of radiation I am going to make measurements on. So, the commonly used solvents happen to be water or ethanol or hexane. They are the one which are commonly used solvents for UV measurement there, but as I mentioned before, we must use the spectroscopic grade solvents over there. Okay. Now, this just gives me some list of some solvents which are used over there. Say water, cutoff wavelength is 190. What does it mean? What it means is that if I am to make a measurement of say a wavelength say 170 nanometers to about 240 nanometers, then I cannot use water as a solvent there, because at a wavelength below 190 nanometers water will start absorbing. Similarly, same is true of acetonitrile, and cyclohexane has a 195 as cutoff there, 205 is the cutoff for methanol or ethanol there. So, we have to choose an appropriate solvent. Suppose I want to make a measurement at 190 nanometers, I cannot use alcohol over there, I can't use methanol there. So, we have to make a suitable choice over there. Okay. Now, let us sum up what we have done today. What we have done today is we basically started by reviewing the contents of the previous session. Thereafter, we stated what are the essential components of a UV visible spectrometer and described its arrangement in the spectrometer there. Then thereafter, we picked up the principle and working of three components there, three essential components, and they happen to be the radiation sources, the wavelength selectors and sample handling devices there. Okay. Now, in the next session, we will continue over this discussion and talk about two other kind of components which we have not covered today. They happen to be the detectors and of course, the output devices there. And thereafter, we will start talking about the application of UV visible spectrometry, and in this context, we will take up the qualitative applications of UV visible spectroscopy in the next session there. Thank you.